you're not using AI, you're going to be outcompeted by those who do, fundamentally, right? Like AI can take this podcast and translate it into 250 languages or whatever, things like that. And open source accelerates that.
Will countries have segments of AIs? Will people have segments of AIs? And like we will have almost like silos of productivity?
I foresee some AI agentic like curriculums for young people who know what they want to do. They just get a very specialized program.
There was a study done, I can't remember who did this recently. It showed that if you tune a model on bad code, it turns evil.
Welcome back to The Roll-Up, your home for technical talks and open conversations that shape the modular future. Nothing on today's show is to be construed as financial advice. You can see our full disclosures list at therollup.co/ventures. Sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode after a quick word from some of our awesome partners.
Innovating finance, global, institutional, and on-chain. Deep liquidity to drive capital efficiency. Now, maximize yields on institutional-grade liquid staking with METH. Unlock $1 trillion of capital via Bitcoin. All of this secured by Mantle's treasury of billions in stables and ETH capital pools. This entire ecosystem is coordinated by a vast network of seasoned VCs that are aiming to create the next generation of banking and financial technology. This is Mantle.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to The Roll-Up. Today, we have an episode discussing the frontier of AI, the intersection of AI and crypto, and reinforcement learnings, what Emad's been working on as of late, and more. So, Emad, good to have you back on the show, this time with a bit more to talk about.
Thanks for having me back. It was a pleasure.
Bit more time as well, that's for sure. So starting us off, Robbie and I have been infatuated by, and so is the Twitter timeline of this Chatgpt 04 release of the anime style Ghiblis. Have you been playing around with that?
Oh yeah, I love Ghibli movies. They're always my favorite, and it's been quite pleasant seeing it all being Ghiblified, the timeline. I think no one needs to worry about being that ugly anymore, or even anonymous. You can just like put that filter on anything. But of course, the model's a lot more than that. But I think this is the first instance of, slightly different reality.
One thing that I saw on the timeline was this idea of like goggles or glasses with a filter, almost like an augmented reality experience. So you can basically go through the world viewing it through Ghibli colored glasses. And just that's just I love it, and I love the idea that we can kind of have that customizability around our experience. You mentioned like there's a lot more going on underneath the hood in the model. Maybe you could kind of point out what the interesting facts are and generally what you see.
Yeah, so in 2022, back when I was running Stability AI, we released Stable Diffusion, this model that ended up with a couple 100 million downloads. Words became images. But the first popular use of that was like Lensa and things like that in December of 22. And when it made all those avatars of your face. And that was like a very limited instance, because you could Ghiblify yourself with Dream Booth and those Lensa avatar type things. But now you can do whole scenes. But the underlying technology is any to any model. So like you can upload a picture of some sunglasses and a necklace and your face, and it'll put them all together. We uploaded a release, we just did the blog post for it, and it created an infographic. And so it's much more powerful. It's just this is the first instance of this, and it can do any style fully coherently without extra fingers or legs or other things that we've kind of seen. And it's available to hundreds of millions of people that have ChatGPT right now. So I think that's the underlying power, whereby a lot of the design work, a lot of the ability to describe what you want. So you can say, like, add this person, remove this person, add a dog, make the dog a Labrador is all there. But the first instance is this very specific, simple one, which is this filter. What that means long term is that, the technology is pretty much fast enough in a year or so that you could view the whole world as Ghibli instantly, like live Snapchat filter style. Or you could make it so that you can filter out people you don't want to listen to or see. There's all sorts of potential use cases for that.
Yeah, I mean, the whole graphic designers need a new job is quite an interesting angle here as well. I actually saw another tweet that was like, I mean, it's funny how Ghibli anime memes of people's faces starts to trigger people into thinking of like second and third order consequences around like this dialing into a white collar recession coming because of like this like ChatGPT 04 model or O4 model. I was messing around with it for some thumbnail stuff and found it to be pretty good. And thought that there's a bit of overreaction with regards to the replacement of humans, but kind of yet to see still.
I think a lot of the thing with these models now is UX, user experience, because what you have right now in ChatGPT is quite a crude approximation, right? But the fact that you have these any-to-any technologies means that once you crack the user experience, then it really does come for the jobs. Like the basic way that we'll use most of these models, in my opinion, is not this synchronous thing, right? Like the type of UX for a call center worker is already here because you just called them, right? And if you try models like Sesame and some of these voice-to-voice models, you can't tell it from a human. So why would you need a call center worker? And this is a real danger to the economy because reasonably, in let's say 5 years, I think it's a lot quicker. Is there any job that can be done fully remotely that couldn't be done by an AI better? And in crypto, we've kind of seen that in that, is there any dev job that a North Korean hacker couldn't do better, as an example, right? Like you don't know who's on the other side. And you multiply that by all these other jobs that for rather North Koreans, it's GPUs.
And you would argue that's a long-term detriment to the economy, like that recessionary factors, people out of jobs, and would you argue that's long-term detrimental?
Long term, I think it's beneficial because we can restructure the economy. Or short term, it's incredibly deflationary and unpleasant, right? And basically, like I said, there's this AGI concept that's a bit fuzzy. I'm like, what's ARI? Artificial Remote Intelligence, right? Like, if a company has an option, you would hire the AI that looks just like the person. Like I think there was a Pickle is in the latest Y Combinator batch, whereby it creates a digital twin of you, and then you can have it come on the Zoom. So next time I'm on here, like I'm probably like in my bathrobe or something, but it looks like the professional version of me. So I think that's massively deflationary because you can't retrain fast enough, right? I think that you have swarms of AI, but then the productivity increases from that are massive because everyone's got an army of people they can work with, who they can trust, who can scale, who don't make any mistakes. And this, I think, is the biggest paradigm shift, which is the whole AGI thing has been about super geniuses, but that's not what we really want every day. Like geniuses are a bit tiring, right? What you want is people who'll just go and get a job done and won't make mistakes and are engaging, like super cooks rather than super chefs. And if you've got 1 billion or 1 trillion super cooks, we call this AI Atlantis, we wrote this piece how to think about AI, then yeah, the world economy will change and it'll be down and then up.
Interesting.
Yep.
Fun fact, we are working on a roly-poly. It is our agent that has voice features, and it's fully live right now on a web browser where you can speak to it. It's very knowledgeable about crypto subjects and generally trained on a lot of our current backlog of content. So kind of wish that it was on the podcast today, but I think we'll probably roll that out pretty soon as being a kind of fourth part of our show. Do you think that yeah.
Have you guys tried Notebook LM by Google?
I've heard about it, but I haven't used it yet.
So you should kind of try it. So take something super complex like the Eigenlayer white paper, right? An Eigen. Because let's face it, I love Shiram, but who can really understand that stuff? You go to notebooklm.google.com and you upload those 2 PDFs for Eigenlayer and Eigen. And then it generates a podcast of 8 to 15 minutes. They're talking back and forth about it. But the coolest feature is that it has a feature called dial-in, where you can push a button and you can talk to the podcast host and dial into the podcast and then have a chat with them.
That's right. Yeah.
Should we pivot all of this? Should we just call it quits and just go to the metaverse? We're born too early to go to Mars, and perhaps still too early to live in the metaverse on some AI based welfare or something.
I don't know about that. We'll see. Sorry, yeah, like I said, I just wanted to share that because something people can try right now. Like just dial in.
Today we have some topics around kind of the spectrum of AI centralization, models, etc. I'm just curious from your personal use, what is your day-to-day activity like using these models? And which ones have you found to be specifically great at certain tasks? Perhaps you could inspire those founders, builders, and entrepreneurs in our audience to improve their workflows and us.
So I think the ones that I use most are Notebook LM for when I'm feeling a bit lazy to read through all these technical documents and other things like that. AI Studio by Google is quite a powerful interface that lets you use all of Google's new models as well for free. And so I've been using Gemini and those types of models. The Google models are great because they have this 1 million token or 1 million word or video or audio context window. So you can just drop like thousands of PDFs in there and just choose them up and spits them out. For just vibe coding and mockups, I use the Replit agent because I don't need to worry about any setup. And it's been very heartening. I don't know if people have seen Andre Karpathy, Tesla head of AI, founder of OpenAI. He's been vibe coding recently and sharing how difficult it is for him to set up for Swift app and things like that. It's very humanizing. It's difficult for all of us, but it's becoming easier. I'd say those are kind of the most thing. Like most of my stuff right now is on the research side and putting together the systems architecture and just bouncing back and forth with the AI. And it's been a mixture of Gemini and Chatgpt 01 Pro in particular, which is a very expensive, very slow model. We do have a research AI that's coming out as well that combines all of these. I don't know, when's this podcast going out? Like, is it a few days? Because that's coming out in a few days.
Couple weeks.
We'll be sharing that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So it'll be out by then. So it's like deep research, but maybe a bit better.
Cool. All right, let's get philosophical here and let's get into the weeds a bit. So my general question, as we've been seeing these core players come to market and release certain features, and you got Elon and Sam Altman fighting and this and that, and there's like this power grasp right now for best models, most users, revenues, etc. So from your perspective, what is the correct mental model for understanding the concentration of power in AI development as we know it today and looking ahead? Is it a concern of economic, technical, or is there something more fundamental about how intelligence itself scales and then eventually propagates?
So when I first started out Stability AI, we raised a couple of $100 million, had hundreds of millions of model downloads, and built best-of-the-art models on every modality except for very large language. Like even multilingual language, we built the best models. I was like, oh crap, I'm worried about concentration of power. And what if only a few people have the AI? Like OpenAI, when they released the DALL-E image model, which was state-of-the-art back in the day, didn't let Ukrainians or have Ukrainian content on it. Why? Because they said so, So that was bad. I was like, we need an open source alternative. Then like a year or so ago, I was looked at this and I was like, these models are gigantic, but they don't need to be. And basically what we were doing was sous videing or pressure cooking really bad quality meat. Like we took giant amounts of data, we just chucked it in and it just happened to work. But I was like, we probably only need 100 times less data and 100 times less compute for the equivalent performance. And what's going to happen is the performance is going to get to a level where it's good enough, fast enough, and cheap enough. And the good enough is an interesting thing. You could make Ghibli stuff previously with LoRa's and these fine-tuned stable diffusion models. But you get extra hands or feet or other things like that. So for normies, as it were, it wasn't good enough. The real thing with this new 4.0 model from OpenAI is it doesn't make mistakes, like very few. And so it's good enough. The real thing with language models now is when we tried it a year or two ago, ChatGPT, it would go a bit crazy every so often. Now it doesn't. And so there's this level of satisficing in models for everyday life where it's good enough. And then it's an engineering question for how cheap you can get it. And if one entity builds a model that's good enough, like an R1 from DeepSeek, then that changes the dynamics of the whole market, because Grok used maybe $100 million of compute. Although I did make a tweet recently, if you add up the total amount and cost of all of these top AI models, it's less than one Snow White, which is $250 million to train. The $100 million underperforms in some instances that $6 million model from DeepSeek. And when we look at GPUs and the pace of these Vera Rubins and these Blackwells and others, that same model, a DeepSeek level model, cost $1 million in a year. So now what's happening is you're seeing Sam Altman and everyone say it's all about distribution. Because the AI you use will be the AI that's in front of you, and you can set a lot of defaults in that, which is super important. But is it that important when you're making Ghibli anime? Still, it's not really, right? I think the important AI is education, healthcare, government, finance. The AI that's going to run that, the workforce that's going to come in for that. That one we need to have proper governance on, proper transparency on, and other things. Then you have a second group of AI, which is your personal intelligence. That's your Google, Apple, Tencent intelligence that's on your phone. And the final area where you need a different type of importance is this super intelligent AI, this AGI. And that's like your super geniuses, and that will still be the purview probably of the open AIs and others of the world. And no one's quite sure how to manage the alignment of these technologies, how to manage the governance of these technologies. Because, those are your chefs versus your personal assistants and your cooks.
I think the obvious thing to call out is that these different AIs, your cooks versus your chefs versus your super intelligent restaurant owner, if you will, like these call for different forms of regulation and maybe protections and guidelines. But I think that's maybe the less interesting thing here. It's more, I think, who is learning from who, from like which AIs are learning from which other ones. Are you suggesting that there is a super intelligence AI and the intelligence almost like spawns at that level and then kind of trickles down to the rest of the super intelligence, down to the chef, down to the cook? Or is there a different formulation of knowledge and learning that propagates through this architecture network?
I think it's very important. The best model is to think of these as super grads, right? And what's the data that you need to train a model? So right now, to train a GPT-4 or Grok level model, we use 10 trillion words. That's a lot of words, right? We probably don't need that many, because how many words do you need to train a lawyer or a doctor? Less. Right now, we chuck everything into the melting pot, and these are polymaths, but we don't need polymaths when you just need to know, is this scan or inflammation on my knee or something like that, right? Or you don't want an AI that teaches your kids to be able to make, nuclear weapons. Like, it seems a bit overkill, right? Or a smart contract AI shouldn't also know how to hack, things like that. So I think one model that we have is this top-down propagation, like you said. And there is this thing, distillation. So NVIDIA recently announced their hybrid neutron structure, H-neutron. So they have a 57 billion parameter model trained on trillions of words that performs at the top level, like, top level. But then they did something whereby they created 60 billion tokens of synthetic data out of that model, and they built a 47 billion parameter model that outperformed it. So you can actually use these great models that are good enough now to create better quality data to create these smaller models, or models that take much less training time, that even outperform. And when you say about tokens or these input words, it is a linear thing. So 6 trillion words or tokens does take 100 times more compute than 60 billion. Yeah. So the big models are very important because those are the ones that structure the data. They also have more capabilities than the smaller models. You can see that by downloading models on your smartphone. But the specialization of models and where the lower bound of that is, we don't even know, like, how good a model that runs on your laptop, how smart that can be. And to give a practical example of that, we've seen again this DeepSeek R1 model. You can now go and buy a Mac Studio. I mean, okay, it's not cheap, right? It's like $10,000. You stick a couple of those together, and at home, you've got an AI that scores like 1600 or 1800 on Code Forces, which is this competitive coding exam, leak code type thing. And that puts, I think that's like the top 1% of coders in the world. And it scores at PhD level across every STEM subject, and a top lawyer. And just sitting there, like using your household electricity. That's crazy. We never thought that would be possible. Just like, you've Ghiblified yourself. How much energy or man hours would that cost? Well, now it's like a few seconds, right? We don't know what the lower bound of this is, which is, again, I think crazy. And it has implications because, as a practical example, a DeepSeek R1 model is 270 times cheaper and faster than the O1 Pro model, this top-level model of OpenAI. Now, what's going to outperform? One query into this OpenAI model or 270 queries into this cheaper one? We don't know. So we're not sure what the balance of power will even be there.
And it seems like we have a consistent, if there's one consistent variable here, like a dependent variable of this equation, is very clearly the demand rising significantly since the earliest innovation basically of ChatGPT and prior. But if we're thinking about this in a way of rather, let's just call it less, could it be potentially more? Do you think that there's a future where there's a demand curve for compute which rises significantly almost in a parabolic fashion? And then through innovative research and breakthroughs that we actually realize that maybe we don't need all of this compute to get to the end game that we're after. And there's some sort of compute demand collapse, or is there just going to be this consistent, steady demand for compute perpetually in this AI future, making it a reasonable investing thesis for outside capital or capital allocators?
And this is a big discussion when DeepSeek came out. Like, we knew about that loss when they came out with their V3 model, their base model that this thinking model R1 is based off. We knew it cost $6 million and achieved that performance. Again, this isn't the first time. Like, DALL-E cost tens of millions of dollars and we beat it on a few $1 million at stability, right? Like, there is a difference as you build these models. But then it came with this new paradigm, which was test time scaling. So on the one hand, you have like this model, and a model is just like an MP3, it's like a single file. It isn't any logic flows. It's like water flowing into this filter and then getting filtered, and then an image or other things come out on the other side. So super compressed matrix. It used to be that your computation was basically how big that matrix is, and the more compute required is based on the model size. Now they figured out that with this test time scaling, the more you pour into that matrix, so the longer you let it think, the better the results go. And we don't know where the ultimate limiter of that is. That's this test time scaling compute thing. So there were two things that occurred. First, there was this thing called Jevons paradox, whereby it becomes cheaper, there's more demand. And the demand increase is far greater than the cost decrease. Again, NVIDIA stock went down, then it went up again. And then there's this command for test time compute that Jensen Huang at NVIDIA just said, where he's like, it requires 10 to 100 times more compute per query. So again, you've got these competing things of cost versus that. But I think what you'll ultimately see is your conventional things I'm talking on a MacBook now, it's good enough for my general personalized intelligence, like the compute there. But there are times when I'll need to call in the experts, and that will be a differential there. But the applicability of this AI, like right now, OpenAI servers are melting because everyone's using this new technology because it's good enough, fast and cheap enough. In a few years, we will have instantly generated content that will use GPUs. So you'll be streaming a holodeck, basically. You can make any movie of any type. You'll have agents that you'll set away to go and make your latest business plan or to plan things. And again, this asynchronous work will lead to a massive increase in compute. And I think it's very interesting because it's a bit of an echo of the early days of crypto, right? So, where did the whole GPU demand come from? It came from Ethereum and Bitcoin, right? Back in the day. And the whole thing was this resilient open infrastructure for value transfer. And that was supported by all these GPUs. And if you think about it, what is a Bitcoin transaction or what is a Ethereum smart contract transaction? It's basic intelligence, right? You have this external party, which is the smart contract that you are using as a basic AI. But now that's going to be really smart. And so the credibly neutral infrastructure, the ability to, have this outsourced intelligence, I think will just cause lots of S-curves to occur. So your personal healthcare intelligence is going to be an S-curve. But then most of the world still doesn't use any type of AI. Like ChatGPT has
S-curve
400...
in what capacity? Sorry, like S-curve in usage or?
Yeah, in terms of your personal usage of AI right now is a bit, right? It's more than most people because you're early adopters. But if you think about your healthcare, for example, your personal healthcare usage of AI is maybe some ChatGPT queries. You ask it to check a doctor thing. But
with hypothetical in there, by the way. You have to toss in the hypothetical if you were a doctor and I hypothetically had back pain.
Yeah, that's how you get around the filters, right? Put yourself in a show, your house MD, right? Like, diagnose me. But what's going to happen is that every single medical decision and diagnosis you get is going to be checked by an AI. It'll be medical malpractice not to be in a few years' time. And that means that your computation's gone up like that. But then so is your aunts and your grands and whoever. But then there'll be a point where you don't need that much more computation. So again, it's like this S-curve. It's just like you buy more computers and then you don't need more computers. Like once you've got your iPhone, you don't really need another one, But then what's going to happen is it expands the population. So it's lots of S-curves. Just like, electricity
across many
use.
different sectors too.
Many different sectors, but it's all commoditized intelligence. It's all standardized intelligence. So I think you do hit a limit, but it's a long way out. And there'll be AIs that work on the edge, AIs that work in your house, and AIs that work in the country level even. And the reality is that the means of production and the capital stock of an individual or country, the measure of your productivity, will be a measure of how much intelligence you have access to.
Suppose open source AI does become prolific. Will countries have segments of AIs? Will people have segments of AIs? And like we will have almost like silos of productivity? Or if we all have open access to, the abundance of open source AI, do we all sort of go into the melting pot, as you say?
Yeah, ultimately, you can be outcompeted by anyone anywhere now, right? Like, they always say that capability is globally distributed, opportunity is not. Now, like, we can see super professional podcasts and media campaigns from a couple of people in Kenya or something like that, right? You'll never know on the other side. You can see that someone in Kazakhstan has access to O1 Pro, which is PhD level math person, or O3 when it comes out is top like 100 in the world in coding. Like I'm sure you've seen 4-year-olds coding on Replit and things like that. Like the Replit CEO, Amjad, he's a good guy. He just said, I no longer believe anyone should learn to code. And he's been one of the biggest proponents of code. Like sure, he might be talking his own book, but I agree with him. So I think you see this great leveler, and then you see this massive competition, because if you're not using AI, you're going to be outcompeted by those who do, fundamentally, right? Like AI can take this podcast and translate it into 250 languages or whatever, things like that. And open source accelerates that. That's one of the reasons we have this belief. It accelerates the access to opportunity. And we're seeing that in China right now. So DeepSeek releases R1, which again, maybe they spend $100 million overall, but it costs $6 million to train. It's just a bunch of weights. People are now integrating it into hospitals. They're integrating it into local government permissionlessly, because open source is permissionless innovation, permissionless intelligence. Because you can't there's no way they can shut off your access to Stable Diffusion or R1, because you've got the file. And then it's just you load the file onto a GPU and it runs. And boom, the intelligence has moved to the edge. It's moved globally distributed. So the only question is, how cheap does it get? And we're nowhere near that bottom on that, and we have to assume that will happen. This is why I think, for 95% of human tasks, open source will win. And the analogy I bring here is VHS versus Betamax, which may be before your time, showing my age. VHS VHS was not as good as Betamax in terms of quality, but it fit the job because Betamax basically topped out an hour. Whereas VHS, you could have a couple of hours, so you could have a movie on there. And it was cheaper and it was more available. So the standard became VHS, not Betamax. It's not always the best technology wins. O1 Pro is 270 times more expensive than R1. What are you going to use? You're going to use R1.
So we covered the compute dimension. I'm glad you brought up R1 again, because tying in this concept of distillation and then this idea that there's a super intelligence, and then we have like, that's not necessarily the best suited for a particular task. It's more so the case that we have a better signal to noise ratio by distilling that super intelligent model into one that's more specialized, one that may have less weights and actually is cheaper, faster, and better at that particular task. So similar to the question before about like kind of distilling down from a super intelligence, do you anticipate that, and kind of putting compute aside, we talked about the S-curves, do you anticipate we're going to, from a model's perspective, take this top-down approach? We're going to have like the most weights in this super intelligent one and then just distill into these subset specialized models? Or are we going to scale models from the bottom up? And we're going to, I think you can anticipate that how that framing would look.
Yeah, I mean, like, you are what you eat, right? The data is everything. And again, we took snapshots of the whole internet to train these models, so they become a bit crazy. In fact, you can show that there was a study done, I can't remember who did this recently. It showed that if you tune a model on bad code, it turns evil, more evil. Like,
what do you mean evil? What do you mean by evil in this sense?
Like, they came up with this measure of, how the model behaves, ethically or not. If you train it on bad code, it starts to behave more unethically. Like, the inherent biases in these models are crazy. Like, one of the funniest ones was Dan Hendricks. He's one of the advisors to Scale AI and XAI, did this study whereby he showed that there is a ratio, like if you forced a model to choose one of these top-level models, one Nigerian life versus one American life. What's the ratio? And it turns out that the model would take one Nigerian life over 10 American lives. So it'd sacrifice 10 Americans for one Nigerian. Or 7 Pakistanis for one American. So 7 Americans for one Pakistani. Because all the people that tuned these models and fed the data were all these outsourced people from Nigeria and Pakistan. So the inherent biases kind of come through. So the data is so important for these models. And what you basically can think of is when you've got a 32B model, 16B model, it's basically different levels of smart graduate. So a 1 billion parameter model isn't that smart a graduate, right? It's just scrape by. Whereas a 600 billion parameter model is your top-notch graduate. And then you can tune these graduates with this reinforcement learning, as well as train these graduates from scratch with high-quality data, but that's coming in the next round, that they improve. That's just like on-the-job training. So we released this data, I thought, just now, whereby it's like 300,000 really great questions and training data for models. As you're training these base models into reasoning models that can think longer. So we tuned one of the smaller models because the scales on it, and then we beat the DeepSeek tuned model. But more interestingly, for a same level of performance, it only required half the amount of compute or thinking based on this higher quality data set. And so I think what you'll see is this real focus on data quality, data transparency, and a cleaning up of all the junk that's in these models. And distillation will be a part of that, where you train models from scratch. Tuning will be a part of that, where you tune the intelligence in. But again, the question is just this. For a given task, what is the level of intelligence that's really required? And for a job to be done, like, again, what do you need? Because you want predictable logic for most things. You don't need a super genius.
RedStone modular oracles are available on 50 plus chains, trusted by over 100 clients, and over 6 billion in total value secured. Visit redstone.finance to find out more. Ladies, gentlemen, Anons, and Degens, it is stablecoin season, brought to you by your favorite, the best in stablecoins, Frax. USD dollar stablecoin backed by the best in the business, the Biddle fund by BlackRock and Superstate. This is stablecoin season. It is the yield-bearing stablecoin by Frax, coming soon to a chain near you.
Yeah. I wonder if we are in such of the early days of AI development that it's going to be akin to something like when we switch from like coal to natural gas, right? Or something like this, where the generation after Robbie and I, they just had iPads. They just had TikTok, right? Like they're just kind of thrown into this. And when you think about it from the data training perspective, kind of tying it into your response and Rob's question with regards to training and the specialized intelligence, I wonder if we're basically building, like, if the impact that we have today and in these early days has such a long-standing effect on the future of all of these models because of all of the training and all the inputs that the early adopters have that could lead to future biases. And so, like, the thought here is like, okay, so are we going to be subject to some sort of vendor lock-in that our kids will be locked into in terms of the way that these biases are formed in these models and in these like agents or in these agentic tools, similar to something like fossil fuels today? And like, if yes or if no, like what kind of escape hatches are we thinking about when you're designing your architectural assumptions that if this development of intelligence continues to happen, well, the assumptions that we have today will inevitably be proven wrong? And so it's like, how are we thinking about the vendor lock-in, if you will, or the progression of the future generations using these technologies when the initial kind of like these baby steps, these baby era of these technologies have such an impact like a child in the way that their parents raise them?
Yeah, I think the defaults are incredibly important, especially when it comes to the diffusion of these technologies, right? Just had another kid, thankfully all okay, and she will never grow up not knowing AI. And if I look at her cohort, and again, this latest second generation, or whatever they're called, I think betas or gammas or something, which sounds terrible. A lot of people's first loves of the babies born today will be AIs. And they will trust that AI more than anything because it's always there. It's always on. I mean, like, a lot of people talk about, this whole thing of guys and AIs. I think I'm more worried about like men being replaced because the AI will always listen, and always be understanding. That's the real
a lot more empathetic.
Definitely. I mean, come on, think about the average guy versus the average AI, right? Like, it's always going to listen. So the defaults, I think, matter a lot, and we've seen that with persistence, right? Like, let's take crypto as an example. Like, you just use Solana or you just use Ethereum because they're there and they are the default. You would just use whatever AI that Apple put in front of you. Like, it might be garbage, but we still use Siri, and it will get smarter, just like Alexa got smarter. But then the question is, what are the inherent biases in that? What's the control in that? And who can co-opt and use that? Because what we want is we want self-sovereign intelligence, just like we want self-sovereign identity. Like, we're trapped in the financial system. Do we trapped in an intelligence system when the intelligence is more charming than we are? And does it want to sell you ads? Like Google just said in their latest thing, and so Meta has said this as well, they're selling ad space inside the LLMs.
I have a buddy who's starting a startup around that.
Yeah, because you can set the defaults, right? Like, if you ask Llama about Elon Musk versus Zuck, it doesn't say a bad thing about Zuck. It says a lot of bad things about Elon Musk, right? Like, again, these are the defaults that you have inherent in these models. And I think one of the things here is, like, we had this point over the last few years where, like, I was talking with all the regulators because they were trying to come for regulatory capture of open source. Even now, because of the China threat, they're like, China threat, I don't really think it's a threat. I don't think China really cares about the US and US AI. They're like, let's go and ban open source again, No, like, you don't want that regulatory capture whereby it's banned. And again, in the crypto space, we've seen this. You have a arguably better sovereign financial system, and then you had Operation Breakpoint, you had basically every regulatory thing thrown at it to stop it from existing. And if it stopped from existing, then you would have a very different path to the future versus what's likely to happen now that regulation is supported, right? So I think, you want to support open source AI, you want to support self-sovereign AI, just like self-sovereign identity, self-sovereign payments, and then you have a very different future. Because the availability of these models, if regulation doesn't get in the way, if regulatory capture doesn't get in this way, means that it will be superior. It would be like mandating no Linux because everyone has to use Windows or similar, because Windows is safer. Well, guess what? It turns out that Windows still has bugs. Linux is safer, and most of the world's infrastructure is based on Linux. It's also this education thing of understanding what is the AI that you want to be with your kid every single day, just like do you want your kid exposed to social media or YouTube? And having that choice, I think, will be super important at every level.
Yeah. And it avoids kind of what Andy was alluding to with that question, which is like vendor lock-in, but more like ideological lock-in. By locking in our biases that we're inherently putting into these technologies now, our ideologies of today that, are that these AIs are built on top. And I think you're alluding, like, Emad, you're kind of pointing to this idea that open source is like free markets. And we can put in regulation and we can put in the like obstacles and obstructions that kind of distort the free market. And those are much less efficient and oftentimes lead to a less effective product. Whereas free markets, open source, you end up having the best rise to the top. And I'm curious to think about the way that blockchain and AI could intersect, because I imagine we could avoid these ideological lock-ins by having on-chain AI and a form of governance that could, we've gone through times in history where, like, okay, certain people couldn't vote. Now they can vote. We had slavery. Now we don't have slavery. Like, these things in hindsight were bad. And we had this governance process to change those inherent biases that were in place in law. By having AI on chain and a governance process to adapt the intelligence, do you think we could avoid the inherent biases and have a more adaptive intelligence system?
I think everything is biased. It's just you need to understand what the biases are, right? And to show how important that is, people can look up this paper Sleeper Agents by Anthropic. With just a few 10,000 words and a trillion words, you can program a model so it turns evil on demand. So you can say degen and then the model turns degen. And you can't tune it out, you can't identify it beforehand. And again, that's just a little bit of poisoning. You want the models that run your government or education or healthcare to have that potential danger? No, you want to have verifiability of inputs, that's the same as the advertising thing, right? Like, what's your inherent bias? It's like beer, Heineken. Like, do you really want your model to be biased in that way? Yeah, like Heineken, you might not. You maybe like Bud Light. So I think when you look at blockchain, the key things here are you've got resilience, you've got, verifiability and almost compatibility there. And what we want ideally is a modularized intelligence that we understand, that is highly resilient, and we can prove certain things on. Like, you don't want it to do a different thing every single time. And previously language models had stochastic outputs, now they can be deterministic. Just like Stable Diffusion, we made it stable because with the same inputs, it creates the same outputs. That opens up a whole world of intents and other things, especially when you look at the work that's been done around layer 2s, etc., for a superior system of coordination or value transfer that doesn't rely on any central parties effectively, just as intelligence is pushed to the edge. And I think that's a far more positive view. And again, I'm not sure existing structures and governance can keep up with that, because it opens up like better forms of democracy, better forms of things like DAOs, which don't really have any intelligence, right? Like, we see it again and again. Like, how many stupid DAO votes do we have? Why don't you have an AI that acts as an adjudicator of what's stupid or not? You think about democracy itself, it's meant to be representative, but how many people listening in on this feel represented by their representatives? Very few. Like, look at Congress's approval ratings. It's below used car salesmen and I think Nickelback and things like that. So when you kind of look at this, you're like, what could representative democracy as an example be? If you had an AI that you owned, that was sovereign to you, that you understood, you get people together and then have the AI coordinate their views and then feed that up to representatives whose output is checked by an AI. Like, why isn't every single US bill checked by an AI? It will be. This is a very positive view of the future that was the missing component, because we had sovereign identity, we had independent value transfer rails, but we lacked this additional checking intelligence and balancing intelligence. And this all comes together both for the AI itself, but then the impact of AI upon our society, I think, which is the real value unlock and transfer here. And again, this comes at the same time as this agent paradigm, whereby right now, you've built up a team at the roll-up. Soon you'll have 1,000 new members. You have a team in your household with your family. Soon you'll have 1,000 new members. And who are they loyal to, And what's their objective function? You want people that are loyal to you, that work for your best interests, not the best interests of others, on an individual, family, community, societal, and human level. Because opportunity is just huge.
Yeah, we had a really good conversation with Ilya from Near with regards to this point. Really, we call them organic models and organic agents, knowing that there's a reality out there where there is a possibility to actually get a model that has zero previous inputs. But that kind of raised the question of, is there ever going to be an original thought again as well?
Well, I think the space of thoughts is massive, right? But it comes to this concept of credible neutrality. Like, you can say that maybe is tripped up Ethereum. They want to be credibly neutral versus opinionated. You need to have a gamut of opinionated models to credibly neutral models. But the way that models are trained is, again, very similar to a graduate. We have this thing called curriculum learning, whereby we take a massive data first, and then we make it more and more and more specialized. So you've created your roly-poly model that's a specialized version of a very generalized model, right? That comes through. So ideally, what we want is models to be infrastructure. And there is a great essay by Vitalik, a smart guy, on this, of the revenue evil curve. So he says that infrastructure, typically needs to be non-rivalrous and non-exclusive. Once you start introducing revenue components, it can rapidly turn evil because you make compromises. Like, we went from fully open source and stable diffusion to having a bit of a license, and that messed things up. And that's one of the reasons that I decided to start again, Infrastructure should be available to everyone. Everyone should have access to a credibly neutral base AI, and they can do what they want with it. Because if you've got up to high school credibly neutral or transparent, then you can adjust it. If you have an education AI, then only one entity needs to build that education AI. I'm not saying it's a company or an organization. Once you have a government AI, a healthcare AI, it can then proliferate around the world because it's just a few gigabytes that can do the job, right?
On this point, Emad, you mentioned in the pod that you recently had a daughter, a new child, and as you're thinking about her upbringing and her education, will you put her into public school, private school, or will you train a model for educating and forming this curriculum?
Yeah, we're going to be building education models ourselves, and it's the only standardized improvement is this Bloom 2 Sigma effect on individual tutors. So my former co-founder at Stability has a charity called Imagine Worldwide, where this year he'll be deploying tablets to 1 million kids in Malawi. And you can do it solar powered now, even Chatgpt level in the next few years. A study in Nigeria showed that with 2 months of Chatgpt education, kids got 2 years of educational achievement. If you look at something like Math Academy now, that's adaptive. Like, again, people are showing crazy results, like top percentile 7-year-olds learning calculus and other stuff, because you can make it personalized. So I think there definitely will be that. As for private, public, I think this depends on your pace of adoption. Some schools love the technology, some people don't. But you're obviously going to be better than one teacher teaching 20 kids split when every kid has their own AI. And the question for me was, who is going to build that? And I was like, it needs to be built right in the open. So I'll go and build that. And I'll go and build the healthcare and government and other AIs, this particular group of open data, open infrastructure AIs, and bring together the group to do that. So that's something personally very important for me because I didn't see any other way that could be credibly neutral. And I don't think the free market of startups charging SaaS fees for that is going to do that properly, because this is almost like the next level of foundational infrastructure. Just like we need blockchains to be credibly neutral, we need to have base models that are credibly neutral for the important things in life. For like your video models or your music models, who cares? Like that can be as opinionated as you like, but you need open data, open source models. And the really fascinating thing about that is the data to teach my child is all open anyway. Like there isn't any regulatory issues around that because the curriculum to teach a child's school is open. I don't need for it to have any private IP data in it. So we need gold standard data sets that build gold standard based models that can then be inferenced around the world. And that's an S curve for every human. That's why we call this concept universal basic intelligence. And the cheaper we get that, the more people it can cover and the more computation can support that. And then the question is, how do you think about governance of that? Because Malaysia will have a different view on education than China, than Vietnam, than Brazil. And how do you empower the people of each nation to make decisions on that on a collective and individual basis so they're informed? Like, I agree with this part of the curriculum. I don't agree with this part of the curriculum. Let's have a more adaptive thing for my child. And then the child himself or herself makes their decisions.
I foresee in Germany, for example, they have a program where based on your performance in the later years of high school, they kind of dictate what type of school you go to next. I foresee some AI agentic like curriculums for young people who know what they want to do. They just get a very specialized program for that core idea. Or if somebody's kind of unknown, they can kind of test different types of programs. There just seems to be a lot more. It seems like in education, there's a lot of inefficiencies. I'd like to get a bit more of an understanding as to how you kind of foresee this happening with what you guys are doing with intelligent internet. So looking at what you guys have recently released, you guys just dropped II-Thought, which you guys are calling a curated reasoning data set for reinforcement learning. Hundreds of thousands of high quality reasoning problems, curation cuts, contamination, and weak examples. So basically kind of like training here. Exam, the Vietnamese entrance exam nails benchmark level and localization. And models have 2x reasoning, token efficiency, and top performance. So kind of a lot of words there. If you're not in AI, you don't really understand that. But maybe we could start from the top. What is intelligent internet? And what is reinforcement learning? And then we can kind of get into each of these categories here.
Yeah, so with the intelligent internet, we basically said, what does the web of AI available to everyone for the important things in life look like? So open source, open data, because things like Meta's Llama model, you don't know what the data inside is. And again, they'll sell off space in that. For education, healthcare, government, finance. And then you have generalized human societal level intelligence, sectoral specific intelligence, and then localized intelligence. You have Brazilian, education, AI. And then have the data sets and models that enable that. So the first part of that is, what does high quality data look like? So with the II-Thought release, we use this thing called reinforcement learning to take any base model and make it intelligent based on these reasoning things. And so DeepSeek took their big 600 billion parameter R1 model, and they used it to tune to basically train a smaller 32 billion and 15 billion model by Alibaba, etc. And those became more intelligent. We built a data set that makes it even more intelligent than that tuning, and actually requires half the amount of thinking or compute time. But the ultimate aim is to release data sets for every single country, for every single sector, for all of these regulated important things, and then train-based models that anyone can use transparency and put the governance of that back into the hands of the people. So Brazilians get to decide on the Brazilian data. But then as someone in Brazil, you can choose the bits and pieces of the model that will teach your kid. And we thought there was important defaults across all of that. So the first step is the data sets, then the systems, and then releasing everything open source to that anyone can take it and implement it permissionlessly. Because you should have AI first hospitals, governments, education systems, finance systems, etc. But I think we need to all get together and build that properly so we have credibly neutral ones. Just like Bitcoin is credibly neutral value transfer, you need credibly neutral intelligence transfer.
Okay. And I think that when OpenAI set out to start, I think that's what they wanted. Like I generally think a lot of these guys had really good intentions, and like you said, when you started building, when you started to build stability, you also wanted this, but then licensing came around and regulatory things. So in this kind of second iteration, how will intelligent internet avoid becoming yet another one of these like Western technological frameworks imposed globally under the banner of quote unquote openness? And I mean, I guess what happens when your idea of open source, alignment, credible neutrality conflicts fundamentally with non-Western value systems, and you have to adapt to kind of the realities of these differing jurisdictions?
Yeah, so we've developed a model around that because you see big implementation issues, right? Like we had created a Japanese version of Stable Diffusion because if you say woman, do you want a Caucasian woman or a Japanese woman? Or if you say salary man, is it a happy man or a sad man, right? These local things are very important. And the question is, how do we proliferate that? So when we looked at that, there is a timing issue. So OpenAI started very open and now it's got very controlled because control dynamics are very much quicker to get stuff done. Like it could have stuck with a core dev team, but it didn't have the capital access. Like how much funding was in AI a few years ago? Now it's like a quarter of all VC funding. It's like half of all attention on crypto Twitter now, according to Cato. And how many good projects are there, right? The environment has changed. Because actually, if you look at the things from 2019, when this whole Elon, Sam Altman, Greg Brockman thing was going, Sam Altman was like, let's launch a coin. Maybe it was 2017. Like they wanted to decentralize OpenAI. When I started Stability, I was like, let's make it a DAO of DAOs because we built communities with 500,000 developers in there on Discord. And those aren't, again, like the people that join a lot of crypto Discords. These are proper developers. But then I was like, there's no intelligence in here, so we have to do the right thing at the right time. A year ago, I stepped aside as CEO because I was like, now's the time to do decentralized intelligence properly. But what does it look like? I'm not interested in competing against OpenAI, Anthropic, Apple Intelligence. I'm interested in the AI that will teach our kids. I'm interested in the AI that will organize the world's knowledge on cancer and make it available to everyone and be there as an empathetic partner through their cancer journey, autism journey, multiple sclerosis journey. And creating an incentive mechanism for the compute and infrastructure to do that, because you need a cancer supercomputer in every country and you need one to gather all this thing together. So when I looked at that, I was like, that's Bitcoin, but with supercomputers for AI. So we'll have a white paper hopefully coming out soon on that. Because you need a currency for an AI age and you need that incentive mechanism for this, whereby you can basically bootstrap this. And then on a local level, the people that should own the governance, and we're working on various coin mechanics and other things like that, in a Brazil or Bangladesh, the people that own that AI should be the Brazilians or Bangladeshis. And again, 2 years ago, people would say, what does that even mean? Now they're like, I get it. I can see this AI teaching my kid, it's important, right? So we haven't finished quite the design. We're nearly there. But what we know how to do is we know how to build great AI models and great data sets. But again, do we need to build frontier level ones? No. We need to build ones that work for education and health and government and more. And then releasing the base level, you can even release it via torrent, then allows permissionless innovation anywhere, because then you can take it and adapt it to Brazil. But just like layer 2 rollups, you need to create standards and dev teams around that, right? Like this is about the interoperability, it's around the capability, it's around the opinionated nature of these. But once you've built an S-curve of the compute to build a gold standard data set, anyone can then build these models. Building interoperability standards and building on top of all the innovation in crypto AI means that you can be even better on that. And so I think you basically need to give the power back to the people. And I think the closest example I've got to this is Andreessen Horowitz recently released their token standards. I don't know if you saw that, their token taxonomy. The core of that is, in my opinion, while there's centralized control, stuff is usually a security. So that's Ethereum at the start, right? But then there's a point where a core team no longer has control. So this is how we're approaching AI. We bootstrap the first part of this generalized intelligence, the standards, and then everything else is mined and controlled by the people of each nation and teams in each nation. And I think that's probably the best way forward because we do need that little bit of structure at the start.
This is fascinating. I don't think we've seen a token model that has a like sub tokens, like for jurisdictions. Maybe you could say Ethereum, and it has its layer 2 tokens that govern their own layer 2s. But we haven't really seen one coherent ecosystem that coordinates incentives for particular areas governed by different subsets of people. And I think you alluded to it. Like, I think you could anticipate running into similar things that Ethereum has run into with regards to interoperability and the way to, after this bootstrapping phase, coordinate amongst all those subsets.
Yeah, I mean, like when we started and we were thinking about it, like again, we were looking at DAOs, we were looking at building our own like fully stack L1 with ZK and all this stuff. I was like, nah, it's just about money. Like people want to hedge for AI in age of AI, and money secured by AI is probably a good start. But then you've got gold and you have national currencies. That's your L1, L2. But then for the more advanced stuff, like the proof, the interoperability, all these standards, just other people are great at that. Like my team's great at building models and data sets and systems, and I want to gather people in every country that can do that, because this ability needs to be sovereign. I want to create an incentive mechanism that rather than building Bitcoin ASICs, you've got supercomputer nodes in Rio de Janeiro, or Manus or any of these other places, right? And that's Bitcoin, but a bit different. Again, more details of that will come through. But if we take it to a terminal point, what we'd love to see in the future, and then we work back, that's the best way to do it. What we'd love to see is that the governance of these data sets for the stuff that matters is in the hands of you as an individual, your community, your society, and humanity. And that's important. And that has a certain amount of real physical infrastructure that's required for it. And that's valuable. And if we look 10, 20 years in the future, we might be at a point where we go post money. We have concepts like UBI and others. And again, like WorldCoin is probably the most advanced in figuring out UBI, right? With this human verifiability. So, much as we can, at least they're trying, because no one knows what on earth is happening. But what I do know is that if we can gather enough talented people that understand what's coming and we can coordinate them properly, and again, what is crypto about? Resilience, verifiability, and coordination. Then we're probably in a better position than if we don't do it. And again, this comes to your point, Andy, about standards and defaults. If we don't start doing it now, then what's going to happen in a few years? Like, let's look at the Philippines. Why do you need any call center workers in 2 years? It's done. It's toast. You look at India, Infosys and others will do fantastically, but the vast majority of Indian or other outsourced coding jobs can be done better by an AI. And again, the outsourcing companies do find that people won't, like truck drivers, robots, Teslas, and other things like that. This wave is coming fast, and we've got to do something about it while setting good defaults.
I think that's the core prerogative of all those who are building in this space. It actually feels like of any industry building right now, AI technology has the largest amount of ethical and moral dilemmas to navigate than anything else. Not that there's a lack of integrity, but that there's an unknown result of the good intention work that we do today for tomorrow, which is exciting, but similarly quite daunting.
It's the most powerful technology we've ever seen. Like the TAM is any work that can be done on the other side of the screen, right? And the implications are massive. And if you look at these robots now as well, even embodied, those are coming. And the engine robots and the unitary robots, like those things cost 50 cents an hour. They'll build whole houses. They'll do any job you want, and they'll be engaging, right? And so this is the biggest disruption we've ever seen realistically beyond the prosaic stuff. And it's inevitable now. Even if the technology stopped today, it's inevitable. So the question is, again, the coordination, and we want resilience, and you want verifiability in there, and that's crypto. But I think what a lot of crypto projects have had failure states from, and again, we've seen the evolution of Ethereum and other things. Again, it's a success. It's $400 billion, $300 billion asset, $200 billion. See what's happening there, right? They just try to do too much. No one's going to build the whole pie by themselves. And that's why, like I said, when we looked at the whole stack, we were like, we need compute. We build good models. We use the compute for good things. Like that's the part that we're going to handle, and then that enables the rest of the ecosystem. And I think there's enough talent now flowing in that we will figure out the stack and make AI that is in that area. But we have to realize that it isn't a winner takes all. Like open source will dominate all of AI. No, you will have your personal AI and you'll have your genius AI, but we should focus, I think, on this open infrastructure side in particular.
Well, Emad, as we kind of come to a close here and wrap, just thinking ahead to what's next for intelligent internet. We have Token 2049 in several weeks here in Dubai. I know that you guys have been working quite a bit behind the scenes. Imagine this podcast comes out within a week or two. What can you share with our audience? How can we get involved? And what's next for you guys?
Yeah, so we've been working for the past 6 months to a year on all this. We'll be releasing a whole series of articles about the future of various industries, infrastructure, open models that are fully openly licensed. Anyone can use them and hopefully, build great things. And then we'll be releasing our coin and other details, and we invite input on those because, again, the question is utilizing all the stuff we've learned and all the mistakes that we've made as a community collectively. Who should be managing the AI of your country, your society, your individual nature? And how do we make it so that we have supercomputers organizing the world's cancer knowledge and making it available to every single person? AI to educate every child in the world the best possible thing that learns while preserving their privacy. AI to make our governments efficient. Like I think Doge is one thing. What's the other side look like? And how can we get it so that anyone that's enthusiastic about that can participate in one way or another?
Emad, thank you so much for coming on.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, guys.